Listen to the Tommy Schnurmacher Show, live weekdays 9 to noon on CJAD 800 and CJAD.com.
The Syrian refugee crisis has been making headlines around the world for quite some time. Is there an easy solution? Any solution, even if there is it going to come from Western countries like Canada and the UK? Philippe Assouline is a writer, a lawyer, an expert on international relations and Middle Eastern politics, an international relations expert from UCLA. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Philippe, let's talk about this refugee crisis. This isn't something that started last week. How far back does this crisis go?
So I would say it would go back almost to the beginning of this civil war in Syria, which is in 2011, about mid-2011. And the tragedy is that people are only now focusing on the humanitarian element, but even then only on a very limited part of this, which is the migrants that have left Turkey to the rest of Europe for mainly, we should say, economic reasons, right? These people were refugees fleeing for their lives from Syria, but Turkey greeted them. Turkey's got about 2 million, almost 2 million refugees in its borders, but it's not giving them economic opportunities. So now that Europe has started to open its borders, these people are moving to the rest of Europe. And people are focusing on that aspect, but not the civil war that is still raging, that has killed 240,000 people, I think, at this point.
Well, let's talk about that civil war. Who's fighting here? Are these different schools of thought on how Syria should be run? Who are the parties?
So it's a very important question, and this is one of the things that usually goes, unmentioned in the media. You have basically three large camps. You have the Assad side, which is the government, supported very heavily and on the ground by Iran, with Hezbollah fighting on their side. Against them, you have the nationalists, the local rebels, which include Islamists and nationalists that are more secular. And against them both, you have ISIS. And you have three big factions fighting for control of Syria. The nationalists obviously want to make it into a Sunni country. ISIS wants to make it part of the caliphate. Iran wants to keep it part of its axis.
So is there any connection between the refugee crisis and the Iran deal? I'd heard that part of the reason that President Obama ignored the line in the sand is he didn't want to antagonize Iran.
Correct. This is one of the main interpretations. I think it makes sense. I would direct your listeners to a guy called Frederick C. Hoff at the Atlantic Council, who, world expert on Syria, speaks about this. Obama, if you remember, even in 2009, was not at all vocal in his support of the Green Movement in Iran. He's wanted this deal with Iran almost obsessively and did not want to upset Iran. Now, Syria is Iran. Assad is Iran. The leader of Syria, they're part of his axis. And so there's been a complete neglect of that situation, as opposed to Libya or other places where there was involvement. And so it's been allowed to fester and become worse. Barrel bombs and chemical weapons, etc., creating this humanitarian disaster. And the other connection to this deal is that now Iran is about to get $50 to $150 billion windfall, which is more than 10 times its annual military budget. So whatever's going on now is going to become much worse. You're about to see super Iran and super Assad rise in Syria.
So you're saying that the $150 billion heading for Iran, that a lot of that money will make it to Assad? Is that the reason Assad has managed? Everyone thought 3-4 years ago it's the end of Assad and it's any day now.
Correct.
He's still in power. Is part of the reason he's still in power because of the support from Iran?
I would say the lion's share of the reason is support from Iran. They have top military officers on the ground. They provided him with Hezbollah fighters who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. There's a lot of money going on. Assad was one of the first people to greet this Iran deal. There is absolutely no doubt that lots of money is going to be going to Assad.
How does the Iranian government feel about the deal?
Well, the Iranians are very much in favor of it, apart from a few hardliners, but it's very hard to tell what they actually think. They're master negotiators. There's no democracy there, so there's a game of, clashing voices they put out in the media to maintain the impression that maybe they don't want this deal. But if you look a bit more closely, you see that they're very much in favor of the deal. And why shouldn't they be? All they have to do is stall their nuclear program for a little, and then they get a ton of money in exchange.
Now, getting back to the refugee crisis, and you're saying once they're out of Syria and in Turkey, then it becomes a migrant crisis.
Mostly, not entirely, but mostly.
Now, it's not we're talking about a solution to the problem. Never mind a solution to the problem. The problem has just started. I mean, as we speak today, those three sides that you mentioned in the Syrian civil war, the Assad side, the government bolstered by Iran, are still there. The local nationalists are still there. The Islamists are still there, and ISIS is still there.
Correct.
Right? So, and none of them have decided, oh, well, we give up, or we're not going to do this, or
not even close.
Share the power, right? There's no desire for that.
There's no
all.
reason for optimism at all. That war is going to keep going for a long time, unless with the influx of money from Iran, Assad manages to wipe out his opposition, in which case you'll have a lot more refugees coming out.
Well, but the thing is, if Assad wipes out his opposition, that means that the nationalists will be gone, the Islamists will be gone, and ISIS, he'll defeat ISIS. That it will be Assad who managed to defeat ISIS.
Well, Iran, through Assad and Hezbollah. Yeah. ISIS is a threat that we pay very close attention to because it's been very successful in its propaganda. Now, this is something I study. The effect of emotion on focus, on judgment. In reality, ISIS is a trivial threat compared to Iran and Hezbollah. Hezbollah has 100,000 rockets and missiles. ISIS has 0. Hezbollah is supported by Iran, which has potentially nuclear submarines. You know, ISIS is a ragtag bunch of jihadis leaving Western countries and Arab countries and fighting with weapons they found or taken from the Iraqi army.
Now, this texter says, so let's say that you get your way and Assad is removed from power. Are you looking forward to another failed state full of terrorists and ISIS? So better to deal with the enemy you know than to have the country fall to anarchy and perpetual war. Assad is better than the alternative. Now, there have been some people who are saying that Iraq was under control under Saddam Hussein, and Libya was under control when Gaddafi ran the place, and we didn't have any of these problems. It was pretty miserable for many people in those countries, but we didn't have this level of international calamity. What happens if Assad is removed from power?
Well, you have chaos in Syria now. If Assad is removed from power, all bets are off. A lot of the civil war could go on. You might have a Sunni Islamist state rise. I mean, those are the two most likely options. But there's a lot of things the West can do short of, pushing for regime change. And it should be noted that had they gotten involved a few years ago, it would have been much easier to solve. But for example, a no-fly zone, like was established in Iraq after the Gulf War, protecting the Kurds and the Shiites in the north, they could do that to protect Sunni civilians. And then you wouldn't have this massive refugee crisis. That's just one idea. But yeah, the devil is a very strong argument in the Middle East, but you're only delaying the inevitable. When Saddam Hussein was removed, what happened is that you had underlying tensions that were exploited by Iran and other actors in the region, and then you had a civil war come out of it. You are delaying the inevitable. I hope the Arab world is going through a bit of a Westphalian moment, the way Europe got out of religious wars, 350 years ago, and slowly finding its way to democracy. But it's a very painful process.
Now, why is it in the interests of Iran to spend a lot of that money? You talked about a figure, $150 billion it will now have access to. Why is it in the interest of Iran to spend some of those billions on boosting Assad?
It's an excellent question. So Iran's foreign policy is a revolutionary one, and it's about it projects its strength by destabilizing regimes and countries in the area. And this is why it's been rewarded. It's part of the reason the world community is so afraid and careful in dealing with Iran. Now, part of that, maybe its biggest asset, is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Syria provides the route to pass weapons and supplies to Hezbollah in Lebanon. If Syria falls from the Iranian axis, Iran is dealt a severe blow. And so that's why it's spending money there. But Iran is spending money in Gaza. It's supporting Hamas. It is spending money now in the West Bank. It's spending money in Sudan. It's spending money in Egypt, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia. Everywhere it's supporting terrorist and insurgent groups because that's how it throws its weight around in the region.
Why do this question has come up a number of times? Why do many countries in the Middle East refuse to accept any of these refugees? We'll talk about Saudi Arabia and Israel. We'll take more of your questions as well. My guest is an international relations expert from UCLA, Philippe Assouline. If you have any questions, 514-790-0800. If you prefer to text your question, you can do that as well. Text it to 514-800. Coming up after the 11 o'clock news, a connection between a West Island youth and the attacks in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu last year. Developments in the theft of $10 million worth of silver from the Port of Montreal, and major news for the Habs. All that and more coming up at 11. Right now, our conversation.